On a night in 312 BC, the Mediterranean tore through a merchant vessel off the coast of Phoenicia. A man named Zeno watched his entire cargo vanish into the dark water. Decades of labor, social standing, and financial security sank to the seafloor. He washed ashore hours later. At 50 years old, he was drenched, exhausted, and possessed nothing but the salt water on his skin. When a random storm erases every material marker of who you are, what actually remains? Zeno had zero capital left to trade, but this collapse of his material world forced him to seek a foundation that couldn't be washed away, a search that eventually produced the school of Stoicism. Instead of returning to the shipyards to borrow money and chase a replacement fortune, Zeno walked to Athens. He wanted answers, not silver. In the bustling marketplaces, he began apprenticing under the Cynics, philosophers who intentionally lived without property to prove that humans do not need possessions. He spent the next decade investigating a single problem. If the sea can take your ships and a thief can take your purse, what specific human assets survive the unpredictable storms of life? By the time he was 60, Zeno had engineered an answer. He began teaching it publicly here, in a covered walkway known as the Stoa Poikile, or the painted porch. The students who gathered between these pillars eventually took their name from the architecture itself. They became known as the Stoics. What Zeno taught them was a direct, practical framework extracted from his own ruin. He had converted his personal disaster into a replicable psychological tool. This diagram illustrates the dichotomy of control. The left maps external variables you cannot command: weather, markets, illness, or kings. The right isolates elements you possess total sovereignty over: choices, effort, and internal judgments. Remember the sunken cargo. Relying on external wealth makes peace fragile. Therefore, Zeno argued that the only truly reliable asset is virtue, your capacity to live logically and act with reason. Virtue is the only wealth that firmly belongs in the right circle. The logic is tight. You cannot control the ocean, but you can decide to stop linking your emotional stability to its tides. To test this logic, Zeno lived with extreme discipline. In a city of immense luxury, he wore thin tunics in the dead of winter and subsisted on water and simple barley cakes. He treated these choices as practical drills. If he could remain content with barley cakes and cold air, he proved that his inner peace didn't require a fortune. By repeatedly practicing with less, he ensured that future reversals of fortune would have no power over his emotional state. He was rehearsing the shipwreck. He was proving to himself every day that physical loss could never emotionally bankrupt him again. The utility of this mental armor proved massive. Centuries later, Roman emperors like Marcus Aurelius would rely on Zeno's framework to maintain their sanity under the crushing weight of absolute power. At the exact same time, enslaved individuals used the identical logic to find internal sovereignty when the state stripped them of all physical rights. The universe will eventually break something you value. You cannot control the storm, but the space between that loss and how you choose to respond to it, that is entirely yours.